This is The Conversation. We're continuing with the topic that we were delving deeper into from the last episode, which is Know Thyself. Perhaps one of the basic, but definitely one of the most important ones as well, which defines the importance of our existence. From the last episode, we came across existentialism, which we delved a bit deeper into, and in the process there were a few terms that also came up, which is rationalism and empiricism. And today, a few guiding questions that we'll be looking into as well is, why is it that most people think they know who they are and of ourselves? So in order to address this, as always, we have Randani with us today. Randani, welcome to The Conversation.
Thank you very much.
It is always such a pleasure to have you with.
It is a pleasure indeed.
Yeah, having meaningful conversations, eh?
Yeah, very insightful and deep at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, that's cool. So let's go back perhaps a few steps.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you might want to expound on from the conversation that we had on the last episode?
Yeah, on the last episode we had a lot of things to discuss, and I feel as though we did not really follow the timeline as to when these views were prominent in time. We did talk about empiricism, which said that sensual experience is the only way to acquire knowledge. We did talk about rationalism, which emphasized reason above everything as the only method of inquiry and to assimilate the truth, I think.
Yes.
And we also talked about the Newtonian worldview, which coupled these two together and produced a new paradigm which ruled the world for 300 years before Einstein. And we did emphasize that, at least in my estimation, that one cannot really be an existentialist and one cannot really be a rationalist or an empiricist alone.
Okay.
All these are meaningful and truthful and has led to great scientific discoveries. However, as a guiding beacon for one's life, one needs to encapsulate all of them in order to have a meaningful experience, or even if one is searching for the truth, whether it is the truth about one's own being or the truth about the world, one needs to at least rely partly on sensual experience, which is empiricism, and one needs to use their analytical thinking, whether it is through Descartes' method or whether it is a method which they discover. But reasoning is something that I value myself. And at the same time, one cannot really judge everything and judge truth from their own personal experience and say that my experience is the only one that matters. There are no universal truths. There are no universal moral standards. I don't think that is appropriate. So I think from the last time what we concluded is that one needs to encapsulate all of them and find some meaning in their own lives where they perceive themselves as someone that is having a unique experience. There goes the whole unique idea. Like you are unique, even your fingerprints are unique. So you are a person that is experiencing the world, and as you experience this world, your experience does matter, but it is not the major or the absolute measure of what truthful experience is. It matters, but you have to think through it rationally.
Okay.
And also, as you rationally thinking, at the same time, you don't deny all sensual experience, because part of the reason why denied sensual experience is that senses can be deceived, and that's true.
So, in other words, so that we are all together here. So, of all these three aspects that you mentioned,
Yes.
empiricism, rationalism, and existentialism.
Yes.
We cannot just take one
Yes.
of them
No.
and say, now we're just going to take this and this is going to define my entire
life. Yeah.
the reason why I exist, my purpose,
My purpose,
and I just perhaps pick
Get
this
stuck
one.
on that. Yeah, so I don't think it is a good idea, at least in my own estimation, because if you look at existentialists, for instance, it led people to rebellion in the 60s. I mean, in the 60s in the United States,
Really?
was a great year of rebellion. That's when the hippies went east to look for ways of meditation, and that's when Hinduism, for instance, was introduced in most Western countries.
Okay.
So the Western had their technology and the Eastern had the philosophy. So marrying the technology of the West and the Hinduistic or the wisdom of the East,
Yeah.
came a view which was accelerated by existentialism, because now everybody could define meaning for themselves, and everybody can define purpose for themselves and can define truth for themselves. So it did not matter whether you were being taken into some transcendent trip. It did not really matter, because it was your experience and that was your truth.
Yeah.
And some of the consequences of that was that people then started engaging into drugs, LSD, in experience, and marijuana, and all these things that people were engaged in, because it took them on a trip in which in that world, their own world, they would define how things are, and they would come up with their own truth. So which is why I think that existentialism can be very dangerous. Like I said, it's close to nihilism, and if you are in a nihilist view, you are probably a druggie that doesn't care about life and that just living as though there is no tomorrow. So we have to draw lines as to how far we can entertain existentialism. Like I said previously in the previous episode, that their starting point is quite profound, and I think any inquiring mind should start there.
All right, this is very interesting.
Yeah.
Before we continue any further, what is nihilism and how does it marry with existentialism?
So both nihilism and existentialism, no meaning to life, and of course they denounce God, because that's why most of them were atheists. Like if you look at the existentialist proponent Jean-Paul Sartre, he was an atheist himself, a French philosopher. Nietzsche, well, I don't know, because he wrote about the death of God, and most people interpret that as though he was glorying in the death of God, but he was somehow warning. Those who have studied his work deeper say that no, he was actually concerned that we are mortifying God in our values, we are mortifying God in our governments, and therefore we were going to make out our own God. And he predicted what would happen in the First World War and the Second World War, that if you killed God, then the state will replace God. That's about Nietzsche. I don't want to go deep, but your question, just to come to your question, so the difference is that nihilist says there is no meaning to life, there is no purpose, so live as much as you want, do as much as you want, there is no God out there that's watching you to check your steps and all that, so live freely, as it were. But existentialist says, okay, well, there is no meaning to life, you can define your own meaning by your own experiences.
So in other words, that is why then most people maybe would take drugs,
yes,
in order to have this heightened experience.
Exactly.
So that according to the existential point of view, then they're able to sort of like come to a heightened experience which they can define better. Meaning.
Exactly.
So it how shall I put it?
It's seductive, to put it in another way.
Okay.
It's the seduction of existentialism, if we may put it another way. So, but I believe personally, and I'm not trying to impose this view on anyone, that there are universal moral standards. So if, for instance, things that you cannot defy gravity. So most people say, well, I do things with the rightmost intention. That you stand on the top of a cliff, you want to commit suicide, the next person stands on the top of the cliff and they want to fly. Both of you, one has the rightmost intention, the other one has bad intention, they jump. Will they face the same destiny?
Well, yeah. By gravity, right?
Exactly. They are all going to crash down. So it does not matter whether you have the most purest intention. Intention don't sanctify or don't cleanse the act, as it were. So we have to be very careful on existentialism. And I would say that, you see, what is mostly dangerous is that people entertain these philosophies without them knowing exactly what philosophy it is that they are entertaining,
or perhaps even where they come from,
or where their
root is, who was the father of this particular philosophy.
Yeah, and that's really sad, because how can you entertain habits, actions, and ways of thought which you have no idea where they came from?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I find this quite interesting. When you speak, and then how we find meaning, or rather how an existential point of view says that I am going to find there's no meaning to life, but rather I'm going to find meaning myself.
Yes.
In other words, like just to go back just a step further, we say there is no supernatural superpower out there.
Yes,
There's
yes.
nothing that is governing and looking at us like a hawk, so to speak.
Exactly,
And
yeah.
there are no predetermined guidelines.
Yes, exactly.
There is nothing. There's no standard.
There's
no perhaps moral standard.
There's nothing.
There is nothing of which you take reference from.
Exactly.
It's literally just like an empty space.
It's an empty space.
And we come to it
Yes.
and we define everything.
Exactly. And I am my own limits.
And I am my own limits. Therefore, there is no reference from which I say, if I do this, then I'm wrong. If I do that, then I'm right. Because there's no right. There's no wrong to start with.
Exactly.
There's nothing.
Exactly. The paradigm of the world today. Yes. Because you talk to people and you say, brother, or you say, hey, that's wrong.
And they say, according to who?
According to who?
what
Exactly.
standard?
According to me, this is right. According to so that's existentialism, entertained in the obscurity, if you like, because people don't have no idea what they are entertaining. Like I
Okay.
said, that in my own personal experience, when I rebelled against school, I rebelled against church, I rebelled against everything. I did not know that was an existentialist starting point, And I'm thankful. I do believe in God, so I am thankful to God that in my existentialist view, I did not end up with nihilism. Because an existentialist stand without you being conscious of exactly what you're entertaining, you're going to end up with nihilism. And all acts of rebellion leads to witchcraft. Literally. Most of the people in the 60s, for instance, most of the students, the university students that rebelled and began to entertain existentialist worldview and entertain Eastern philosophy, they all ended either in Freemasonry or in any group of the cults, because that's actually the fruits of rebellion. So it does have that rebellious tendencies within it, and that makes it very dangerous. And what also makes it more dangerous is that it denounces all religion. And if I come to you, it's very seductive, because if I come to you and say, Kananel, your life has been defined by this fem and familiar doctrine, that's wrong. You need to step out. You need to start defining yourself. You feel so seduced. You know why? Because then you are the one that is doing the defining, and that sort of gives you an illusion of power.
All right. I feel like, now I have never been wrong according to any other person.
Exactly.
Then I can start from scratch.
Exactly.
And then I can do this. And if I feel justified about it, then it's good.
It's good.
It's well and good.
It's well and good. I mean, like, we know very well how to sympathize with ourselves, don't we? I mean, if there's one person that you would never blame, is yourself.
Absolutely.
You see, that's why it's difficult for someone to accept that they are wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, like, even if you go to the so-called saints, people that claim at least to be holy, they still have the same problem, not being willing to admit that I am wrong. So I think that is the danger of existentialism. Are we still catching up from the first episode, right?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Now that I think we have covered pretty much the ground for existentialism, its glory, and perhaps also its dangers that might be underlying. Now let's go back to our questions. Like, how are we aware? Why is it that people believe that they know themselves and they are aware
of themselves? Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was in Claremont, the School of Practical Philosophy, the first question which we were introduced to was, how are we aware of ourselves? And it has stuck in my mind ever since then. I mean, it's been almost like 5 years now since I left the school, but it is stuck with me. And I think it has to do with consciousness. I mean, consciousness has not been understood, not even by the most renowned scientists. No one really knows why we are so conscious. Are you looking at the situation right now? Are you looking at me? Yeah, that. No one can explain what it is.
That is quite interesting.
Yeah.
That is quite interesting.
Yeah, no one knows. No one knows what this is. How we are able to be conscious, let alone being conscious of the world, but being conscious of our own self. Maybe let's put that on a hold. I would try maybe to answer, I am not sure, but at least give a clue coming from why is it that most people think that they know who they are. I think it comes with a shame if you think that you don't know who you are. Like, come on, someone says to you, you don't know who you are. What is the first thing that you say? Are you crazy? I know who I am. I've been with me from birth, like that. So I think it comes with an embarrassment to admit that one does not know who they are. But I don't think that that's how we should look at it, because I think it's the beginning of a revelation, at least to accept that one does not know who they are. Because then if they don't know who they are, or at least if they suppose they don't know who they are, then they can start inquiring about themselves or their knowledge of self.
Okay.
You see, so most people feel embarrassed that they don't know who they are. I felt embarrassed myself in my voyage, coming to discover that I don't know who I am. And I could have said that, I did feel embarrassed, and it's something that you don't want to share with everyone.
Yeah.
That you actually don't know who you are, because everybody's going to consider you, marginalize you, and putting you in a little box. And
Yeah.
at that time, I was smoking marijuana, so definitely was going to be thrown in a crazy box. But this was a serious inquiry. Who am I?
Yeah.
So I think the number one reason they are is because of they're not willing to admit that they don't know who they are.
Okay, and I think you're bringing a very important aspect there, to say that it's not something I can proudly say, I don't know who I am, I don't know myself.
Yeah.
But then why don't you take it on the positive and say, you know what, if I come to a point where I say, let me stand back, let me figure out who I am, then I'm actually taking a positive step.
Exactly.
Because I'm going this into, it's interesting that I use this word now when you speak of consciousness, but then I go into this aspect of finding, or rather defining myself, but in a more conscious state of mind.
Exactly. And I think that's the glory of it. The fact that I would rather choose to be conscious of the fact that I am searching for the self, it's much better than completely denying that I don't know who I am while I'm getting lost each and every day. Because in that moment when you say, well, I know, the moment you say I know, then you will not know the next thing.
It's more like you have closed.
Exactly.
It's like case closed.
Case closed.
It's one thing to say the case is open. I
Yeah.
don't know who I am.
Exactly.
Or rather, I'm redefining myself.
Exactly.
And then this is why I start A, B, C,
A,
and
B, C,
then I'm
exactly.
redefining and confirming and reaffirming.
Constructing, as it were.
And progressive. And once I say I know who I am, then case is closed. I'm done.
Yeah,
Here
done.
is me. I know.
Exactly. Especially if you look at the great work of psychology. Two contemporaries whom I'm busy studying now is Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung.
Yeah.
These guys were very deep into their search of mental processes, because that's what psychology is.
Yeah.
Although I do believe that they also, like the Newtons and the and the Descartes, they were in a serious spiritual trip, and there in that trip where they discovered some of the things which have been. In
Yeah.
fact, Sigmund Freud is said to be the father of psychoanalysis, and he changed how people view themselves.
That is interesting.
Yeah, imagine that we are viewing ourselves through the lenses of Freudian psychology. And it's now in the 20th century, it is said that we are shifting from the Freudian psychology to Jungian psychology, because Jung was very mystical. So now, if you look at their great work now, coming to the question, okay, my argument now is that you don't know who you are. You don't know who you are. And part of the reason why you don't know who you are, because your mind is so complex. There are things which you do and thoughts which you entertain where you don't know where they're coming from. And I'll give you one example. Some of the dreams that you have, you cannot explain.
Yeah.
Yeah, who is that?
And I've never been to this particular place.
You've never been to a particular place.
Perhaps I haven't seen a particular face, but then they come
Yeah,
and they seem so clear
and so real.
in my dreams.
What makes it worse is that in the dream, you are the observer.
Yeah,
At
absolutely.
the same time, you are the dreamer.
Yeah.
So how is that possible? Like,
Speaking of that, it's quite interesting. I
Yeah.
remember a friend posting one thing where she's like, I slept and then I was in Australia and then I wake up, I'm still here.
imagine. And you might find that the person has never really been to Australia, but then through in their mind they've went.
Yeah.
So I think such kind of things should suggest that maybe there are some deep things that lies within ourselves which we have no idea about. And what's worse is that those things which we don't know what they are, they make us who we are. You see?
That's kind of scary, isn't it?
It's scary.
That's kind of scary. Like imagine.
Imagine.
Imagine. It's like, I don't know. Like it's like choosing a wardrobe of what were,
Yeah.
but you don't really see the colors. You don't see anything. It's like you get to be defined in a particular set
Exactly.
that you're not aware of. And
Exactly.
then what happens when someone looks at you? You sort of cannot answer to say, yes, I know this is me, this is what I've done.
Exactly. And if you were asked to define yourself, you would not even get close to defining that which people see. You see, so that's really scary. So now Freud discussed this in a way. I think he was one of the first people to popularize the idea of the unconscious. So the unconscious was thought by Freud as this place of tempestuous, conflicting thoughts. So this was the place where most of the things which were repressed or which were consumed were stuck in, and there was a pre-conscious and the conscious. So the conscious was the self as you know it. Like for instance, if someone comes to you and say, "Who are you?" Well, that which you will say is the conscious you, as it were. Suppose we were to divide these realms into autonomous personalities. So in the tempestuous conflict of thought was this big hub of information which you were not aware of, and hence it was called the unconscious. And there was a pre-conscious which was more like a gatekeeper between the unconscious and the conscious. You see, and it suppressed things which you do not want them to come out. For instance, suppose during the week at work you curse a lot, you say the F word a lot, and now you are at church. So which means the unconscious would be that which will make sure that word does not come out.
Yeah, because I need to be.
I need to be reverent now. And so now Freud suggested that. In fact, Freud said, from looking at his clients, that some of these things which are from the unconscious, they come out in dreams and as a slippery of a tongue. So you are just sitting there, or you are standing on the pulpit, you're preaching, and the F word just comes out. That's who you are. That's who you are, and you've been suppressing that, but it comes as a slipper of a tongue, or it comes as a dream. That's why in the dream you see these things that you are not aware of, at least at face value, if you like, but they come anyway because they are there in that tempestuous, conflicting thought of conflict of thought hub, if you like. So Freud was also interested in dreams, in understanding dreams, because he was trying to discover all there is in the unconscious in order to give therapy to his patients. So now I think with those kind of ideas, one should be humbled to say that if the mind is that complex, it's possible that I don't know who I am. And Jung also had a theory of the mind. He also talked about the conscious, the personal conscious, and the collective unconscious. So the conscious was the place of the ego, where the ego resides. Just like Freud, they were contemporaries, they lived at the same time. I think also they studied together, just that they diverted when Jung became very mystical, and then Sigmund Freud says, "I have no place for you." So they, in their view of the conscious, I think they are pretty much the same. But Jung suggested that what Freud called the pre-conscious, which was the gatekeeper, to Jung, that was the personal unconscious. Now, the personal unconscious was the unconscious as made up by your personal experiences. So if you've been in this venue right now,
yes,
there are things which are being absorbed in your mind subliminally.
Yes.
And that makes up part of your personal unconscious. You're not aware of them now. They might just come up as a dream, or as they might just even define your personality without you knowing. You see, and then we went deeper even to the collective unconscious, which is now where in the collective unconscious was where the self is, as it were. So he defined some stages in which one has to go through in order to find the self deep down there in the unknown, into the collective unconscious. And part of what made up the collective unconscious were complexes, which were as a result of archetypes. And archetypes, these were determining influences which are not as a result of our own personal through our time. And he used the example, for instance, when he observed in all mystical religion, it seems like in all religions was the mother and child figure. Like if you go back to the Egyptians, there was Isis and Horus. If you go to the Babylonian, they seem to have been this figure of the mother and child. And today you have that in Catholicism, where you have Mary and baby Jesus. So he thought that was a result of the archetype, and they are manifesting themselves throughout time. And that's something that dwells deep within the human psyche, that the human himself did not really experience that in his own life, but it's something that which he inherited. Well, now that's complex, but I said all that just to remind us that there are possibilities, but we don't know who we are.
That is interesting one, too. It's just a bit scary, because I believe maybe you as well, and the rest of us, we go around with the aspect of I am conscious of who I am, that is why I can be made responsible.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like I can do this.
Yes.
And because I was conscious of it, therefore I take responsibility. That is why maybe with other things, just I can argue a point in court to say that I was not in my right mind, therefore I did that, therefore the sentence could be reduced.
Exactly.
So it almost goes back to the, if there is the certain level of unconsciousness, but that defines us.
Yes. Yeah.
Can we actually be accountable for that?
Exactly. I think that's where the question lies, because most people really like to assume that they are good people.
Yes.
And I think if I come across anyone and they think they are good, in my mind, the first thought is they are naive. It might be an offense. I might tell them, I might not tell them. But then anyone that think good of themselves, then they have not really confronted the unconscious.
But then isn't it a good thing to think that I'm good, therefore I will do good?
No, it does not necessarily mean that to think that you are that, then that will eventually manifest into the action. In fact, part of the good which you assume, it might be because of you are suppressing certain things which you want to do, but because maybe you have developed a tyrannical super ego, as Freud would put it, that suppresses everything that does not resonate with what you have made yourself to believe. So you have made yourself to believe that you are good. So any suggestion to do something out of that realm which you've suggested, then you keep suppressing it. But one day, that's when now you have situation where a man has been frustrated for such a long time and just comes home one day, one little thing happened, and then he just takes a gun.
And then they explode.
And they just shoot everyone.
And then they explode. And then is that in that how? Batum. This was the good
the good man. Exactly. That's a good man.
And then what happened over there?
Exactly. So people wonder, and it's because of an overemphasis that we are good that actually makes people become not aware of their wickedness.
So would you say, there's a question I want to go back, but then I want to address this one first. Would you say then that is somewhat prohibiting our growth?
Yes.
And perhaps the goodness which we want to aspire to. It does good, and then we do not take a moment to sit back and consider the bad that we have in order to address and to deal with it.
Exactly.
So that we can progressively say then, these are my triggers, so to speak.
Exactly.
Or this is my weak point.
You've said it very well.
And then I need to address this so that I can manage a peaceful level at all aspects.
Yeah.
So that even when I get home today and I feel a bit agitated, then I can say, you know what? Today I'm feeling agitated and it's good. Though it doesn't resonate with the good me.
Yes.
Because being agitated, then it's one of the weaknesses. It's not
exactly.
It's not a flowery thing to get out into the world. But then I'm able to address it. Therefore, I will not get to that point where now I take a gun or I yell and shoot and create an unpleasant situation.
Exactly. You have said it perfectly well. That's exactly what it is. Part of what is prohibiting people's growth or our growth is that we assume the best of ourselves, and as a result we are blinded to the wickedness which we are capable of. In fact, the path to goodness begins with the recognition of the potential wickedness. It sounds like a contradiction.
It does, actually.
Exactly, because so many people want these goodness, but they're not willing to go through the path of confronting the wickedness which they are capable of. I mean, this is not even from a religious point of view that we are fallen. For instance, the Christian worldview that we are fallen. It's from a psychological perspective. That if really we want to be genuinely good, we must confront the possibility or our capacity of wickedness. In fact, there is no shortcut. If you have these persona, as Jung would call it, persona is a mask. So the mask which you put forth according to a place where you, when I'm with Kananelo, I'm with this Rendani when I'm with Eric, I'm with this Rendani when I'm with these kind of people. So that's a persona. So we like to masquerade so much with this persona that we are good, and we end up over-identifying ourselves with the persona to a point where we become blinded and obscure to our own wickedness, and we are surprised why.
And
we acted in a particular way.
This actually brings us back, like you said, it's not particularly psychology that we're talking about today, but I think we have no choice
but to just go in there.
Just go in there.
Yeah, let's follow the train.
It's taking us right back.
Yeah.
When you speak of the unconscious,
yes,
the unconscious that makes us who we are,
yes,
then it goes back to say the whole aspect of the fact that we have been exposed to certain situations.
Yes.
Perhaps at the time, either when we were young, this whole thing about young children being traumatized.
Exactly.
Why most things of, say, serial killers.
Yes.
Of abusive people.
Yes.
Dealt with something.
Exactly.
Either through exposure.
Exactly.
Most of the time, and the experiences that we might have had, and we have not thoroughly dealt with all that those line issues. By line.
Exactly.
And they are there, and we are suppressing them.
Continually. And
suppressing
what
them.
Sigmund Freud said that part of what causes us to behave in a particular way was due to our childhood traumatic experiences. Imagine, so part of what you do now is part of has your traumatic experience, your childhood traumatic experience, which you have completely forgot about.
Yeah.
Is now surfacing at a later age. And if you then put an elusive self that is good, whereas the real self is so saturated with these bad, traumatic, wicked experiences, it is no wonder that you will act out of these good self, because it's one thing to say you are good, but it is your action that defines whether you're good. And that is actually an existentialist view, because existentialists say that actions speak louder than words.
Yeah,
it is not so much what you say, it is what you do. So that's why hence I say that if I come across anyone that says they're good, then I'm like, okay.
All right.
You see, so then what is the next thing that I have to do? Watch them act.
Okay.
Watch them act.
Okay.
And then you can then produce a blueprint of who they are.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why most people are so incongruent today, they are not in line with what they say. It's because they have not recognized this huge cesspool of their wickedness, which they just keep dumping into the unconscious, and then on the front they're producing this mask that they are good. One little trigger to just blow the gasket.
Totally out of character for this person.
Exactly.
To do this.
So rather that you live a life where you are aware that part of what resides in me is wickedness. I'm a very open person. In fact, and this is, I'm going to give you what I think, at least of myself, since we're talking about knowing the self. What I think of myself is that I am that person that would do the worst when I know the best. If you were to put the worst case scenario here and the best case scenario here, I'm more likely to choose the worst. And part of the reason why maybe I would do the best is because I was aware before that I'm more likely to take this tangent.
That is quite interesting.
You see?
I'm going to take it a notch back.
Yeah.
I'm going to take it a notch back. I remember in one of the, I'll just call it, in one of the discussions that I had, there was this statement that came.
Yeah.
When we speak of the conscious and the unconscious and how we actually defined by unconscious, though we are not conscious of it.
Exactly.
There was this statement that got me thinking a lot. How do you know that you do not know when you do not know that you don't know?
Oh, wow.
It is not just a riddle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But if you go into it, I'll say it again.
Yeah.
How do you know that you do not know? When you do not know that you don't know?
Wow.
It feels like it's a closed loop, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's quite interesting. I think I had something close to that, although I have not completely comprehended that. But what you know is truth. You see, maybe not close, because you don't know the truth. That what you know is the truth. So how do you know that what you claim to know is the truth? So, I mean, if you don't know what the truth is, then how would you know? Okay, well, it's complex, at least for me.
It is complex.
Yeah.
And then just before we pass on to it, going back to that statement of how do we know that we don't know when you do not know that we don't know.
Yeah.
I think it puts us back exactly to so to speak, and it marries with other things that we've talked about to say, if you do not take time to stand back and to say, let me find out. Let me strip myself perhaps of the knowledge, or let me strip myself of the fact that I'm good, and actually let me put all this off and figure out what exactly is happening. Because once I get to a point where I say I do not know, I have closed the case.
And there's no way out of that. So
there's no way out of. And then the other thing is, if I do not know that I don't know, how would I know that I don't know?
Well, that's quite interesting. It calls for a deep intellectual inquiry. So how do I know that
I don't know?
I don't know. How?
How do I know that I don't know if I don't know that I don't know? Type of thing.
So it's like, I don't know that I don't know. I don't know about that. So where will I even begin?
Where will I even begin to get to a point where I say, I'm aware that I don't know, when I don't even know that I don't know.
I don't know.
Therefore, if you always exist in a mindset of saying I am right, I have done it, I am good, and you never get to a point where you say, let me go back. Perhaps there's something that I missed. Perhaps there's something that I can correct. Perhaps there's something that I overlooked. Then at least you get into this loop where you're saying, you know what, in all honesty, if I have done that and I wasn't aware of it, maybe I thought I was right, but I didn't know. And then it takes us back to what you spoke about, residing in your subconscious mind, preconscious mind, but then they define you.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Wow.
And you never really took the time to at least even contemplate.
Yeah. So would it be right then, maybe to just solve that statement, which sounds like a riddle, whereas it has deep, profound intellectual meaning? Would it be right then that one should live their life as though they don't know all the time?
If I were to give, it's interesting because I'm asking you, but then
I don't have the answers.
But then, if I was to give my personal opinion, it would be, it is right. I feel it is right to live in the affirmative state of saying I will do my best, but every now and then take time
to update.
Take time to update the software.
Exactly.
to say, you know what?
There could be some bugs.
So let me update and get
some bugs.
I don't know what viruses came while I wasn't aware.
Exactly.
Type of thing. Like literally, always take time to look.
So you cannot say really that what knowledge about self is how do we it's stationary, as it were.
Yes. No.
Yeah, it's not. So
I think it's progressive.
It's progressive with time and experience.
Yes.
Altogether. Because today you are much older than you were yesterday, which means your view on things is completely different from how you viewed them yesterday, because what you have experienced yesterday made you to experience these the way you are experiencing it now.
Absolutely. And then when you speak of time, I also think of places.
Yes.
Because being in a different space, or in a different, even country like village, town, city, sometimes you get to realize that people think differently.
Exactly. And you have to orientate yourself to that kind of thinking, at least if you have to fit in or reach anyone or talk to anyone for that matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember I had a few friends that came over the side and were walking around, and they're like, people here, couples here hold hands. Where I come from, it has happened, but it's not as prevalent. It's very rare. And then I looked, it's not like it's if we were to take the reference of morality, it's not like, because couples are couples everywhere.
Couples are couples everywhere. Exactly. Yeah.
So here, it's just that they hold hands, and in another place where they were from, they don't. And you get to see that, okay, so people, it's like that's space also.
Yeah, that's very insightful, because I believe in one motto in my own life, that one need to know at least, or see the world. If you cannot see a world of difference, then it will be hard for you to live, because you cannot accept anything that contradicts to your pre-existing knowledge.
Absolutely.
And that way, then you have closed the door, and you cannot know anything other than what you have known. So if you've grown up in a place where people don't hold hands, you would think it's sacrilegious, even Satanism, to see people holding hands. And I think then, therefore, we should be inquirers. And while we are inquiring, we must use our analytical thinking, we must use our senses, and we must also check our experiences as we walk through the path of life. I think that's about No, I don't want to say that's about it, because there's a lot. I know that there are many ways in which we can define and experience things, but I think for now, that's something that someone can take home and try to compass through this world.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, this has been quite interesting. But before we close off,
Yeah.
because we're about to close off,
Yeah.
can we just like revisit just a bit?
Yeah.
We spoke about existentialism, especially in the last episode. I think it's quite clear, and we revisited that.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. And of course, we can always revisit it. Of course, if you would like to see more, just comment below, and we'll go deeper into it. It's like it's a whole world of information out there.
Yeah.
But let's redefine again. Visit just a bit on empiricism and rationalism and how it marries into the holistic view of how we receive and filter through the.
I mean, beginning with rationalism, for instance, I mean, what Rene was doing was to develop what they call in philosophy an epistemology, which is the philosophy of how knowledge is acquired. Mm-hmm. So he was saying that reason is the way of how knowledge is acquired. And whereas the empiricist, I think in the 19th century, was Francis Bacon. But if you go back, you realize that even the Aristotles of the Greeks were empiricists. In fact, because at the time of Descartes, the prevailing view was empiricism because of the Church of the Middle Ages, which is Roman Catholic, because they had imbibed the philosophy of Aristotle. In fact, it was Thomas Aquinas who managed to synthesize the gospel together with Aristotelianism, and Descartes was then, as it were, rationalism came as an antithesis to empiricism, which asserted that sensual experience is the way to go in terms of acquiring knowledge. So these are epistemologies, if you like. And then comes the Newtonian worldview with the marriage of both. And he did well to do that. I have not really gone deep into studying Newton, but the man was brilliant. Mm-hmm. It is said that the last 20 years of his life, he was known as the sage of the scientific revolution. That's how famous he was. And I think what he has discovered was because of his basis was God. I do not say this because I believe in God, but I say this because of it makes sense. There are actually logical reasons why science works with the creator in place. I mean, don't feel turned off if you don't believe in God. It's just how things are. So Newton had that basis at which he saw that God had created material particles, set them on motion, and the motion was governed by fixed, immutable laws. And at any given time, if the state of the particle is known, then we can predict with absolute certainty where it will. That's actually where calculus came about. It came from that fundamental axiom. So that's profound. That, to me, that's really profound. I'd never really seen Newton in that light. So when I saw what he did with empiricism and rationalism, I said, this is monumental. Of course, as a man, he did not know everything.
Yeah.
And he did not claim to be infallible. I mean, Einstein developed, when Einstein came, Newtonian physics became a subset of Einsteinian physics. So as it was as though it was a build-up, and so we cannot completely deny rationalism. It has its place. In fact, it led to great scientific discovery. Empiricism also led to an antithesis, actually, which made it work. So I say, let us not be proponents of a philosophy or an ideology when we don't know its end. Because it could be that at its end is the antithesis which we have denied and thrown away as garbage. So to be a proponent of one particular philosophy has its dangers. One must be radical in their absorption of philosophy or any way of life. They must look in different ways to see whether they can find the truth. I believe that there is truth in Buddhism. I believe that there is truth in Hinduism. However, isolated truth can lead to danger because it is likely that it can be mingled with error, and truth mixed with error becomes more deadly than error because then it's appealing because it has an element of truth. In fact, no lie can stand by itself. It must have a bit of truth. So truth is scattered everywhere. We must then be like miners, as it were, to dig for the jewels of truth. And when we've collected the jewels, we must then accumulate, because it's infinite. I believe that truth is infinite. In fact, if you don't feel humble when you're standing before truth, then you have not discovered the truth, at least in my estimation.
Yeah, there's that element of inadequacy.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I still need to know more.
I still need to know more. So if you are in a religion or you are embracing a philosophy which says, we have put a stamp, the books are closed, there is nothing else out there, then you should run. Unfortunately, you should run. So that's how I would like to say that. I've just opened another door of other philosophies now, but next time we'll talk more about this. I still feel inadequate from all the discussions from what we've done from episode 1. Even now, I feel that
there's still more to look into.
I feel like I haven't said anything.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I just had a mouthful. I don't know about you, but I feel like I just had a mouthful.
Yeah.
So in other words, we're like, you know what? Let's stand here and let's be open-minded.
Yeah.
Let's consider all the information that is put before us.
Exactly.
And let us filter and find what is meaningful out of that and from that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let us be miners.
Let us be miners of truth. Let us be miners of truth.
Exactly.
And let us propel those inquisitive discussions and questions.
Indeed.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brandani, for being with us today. We really appreciate your time. We hope that you had a meaningful time to all this, and that we can take all these philosophical ideas and ways of discovering truth, be holistic, and know that we are holistic beings, and we can all take it and consider and filter and mine where the truth lies. Till next time, it was such a pleasure that you were with us. Please remember, comment below. Let us have those constructive conversation and comments, because we'd like to hear them coming. And till next time, have a good one.